Welcome all my friends at Bell Trace and all of those who are watching from afar. I've noticed that we have a dozen or so other people who seem to be chiming in and watching from outside. So welcome to all of you who are part of our Bible study. One of the things you might notice is I have a different backdrop today because we're going to do something a little bit different. One of the things that might be the same is the cat is still lurking around, so we may have a visitation during all of this. But we're going to be doing a little bit different process today for our Bible study because this is a different day. As I am recording this, it is Erev Rosh Hashanah. That means Rosh Hashanah Eve, or the day before Rosh Hashanah. And Rosh Hashanah is the new year for the Jewish tradition. And if you are watching this anytime between Friday evening on the 18th and Sunday, the 20th of September, you are on Rosh Hashanah. And this is the beginning of the High Holy Days in the Jewish tradition. So I'm going to be talking about our image behind me here, this shofar, and talking about the holiday. It's perhaps appropriate that as we've been going through our Bible study virtually in the setting that we have, that we would be coming up today, and we'll still get to that a little bit today in the book here, with the story of Abraham. And of course, the Abrahamic traditions are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the three main Abrahamic traditions that persist to this day. And the oldest of those is the Jewish tradition, which goes back to some of the practices that we continue to see in Jewish tradition today. And one of those is the way the calendar is set up and the various holidays and holy days. Now, most of these things have been instituted and have become traditional long past the time that would have been of Abraham or even of David and Solomon, which came 1,000 years or more after that time period. It sort of depends upon which archaeologists you're following as to what kind of time frame we're talking about with regards to when Abraham would have existed and when David would have existed within the context of how we know what we know. There's a lot of wiggle room in there in terms of precise dating. But in terms of dating, we are going from the year in the Hebrew tradition of 5780 to 5781. And I'm going to share my screen here for a moment and take you to a website that I'll share with you, which is the Hebrew calendar, which is HEBCAL, which is a compression of HebrewCalendar.com. And there is a converter here. So you can put our more traditional Western date over here, which today, as I'm doing this video, is the 18th of September 2020. Notice it has after sunset here because the date for the Jewish calendar, the Hebrew calendar, begins at sunset rather than 12 midnight, which is the Gregorian way of doing it. Notice the year right now is 5780. Now, if I change the date over here to tomorrow, which is the Saturday on which this Bible study is due to be watched, I convert to Hebrew, and our date over here has changed to 5781. So, Happy New Year. In fact, as I'm doing this video, the sun is still up where I am, so we are still in 5780. But as the sun goes down, see, you don't even have to wait till midnight for the ball to drop when we're doing a new year here in the Hebrew calendar, because you can do it at sundown, and that's a good time to do it because then you can get to bed early and you don't have to worry about all the honking noises after midnight and all of that sort of stuff. That's never quite caught on for television purposes and all of that. But this is one of the sites that one can use for that. So I want to read for you from a book, one of the things that some people may know about me. Sorry, just a little bit of a glitch there. That may happen here and there, so please bear with me. As I was saying, one of the things people may know about me is that I have a connection with the Jewish tradition. My mother is part of that tradition by the way in which people are calculated as to whether they are Jewish or not. You're Jewish because of who your mother is. It's a matrilinear system there. So I think I've talked about that before a bit in Bible studies and other places, but I also wanted to share this. Oh, will it show up in a camera? See, these cameras don't always work all that well. There we go. This is my Jewish Studies certificate. You can sort of see down here. Area Certificate in Jewish Studies, 1991. I was told one of the original 250 students as they were putting together the certificate program at IU, which became a full-fledged degree program with undergraduate and graduate degrees along the way. So one of the things that happened as a result of that certificate way back most of the courses were in the 80s, but I finally got the certificate done in 1991, was when I started teaching at the military university. The very first course I taught was Modern and Contemporary Judaism, because it was in the books in the catalog, but no one was teaching it. And I said, well, I've got this piece of paper on the wall and I can say shalom. Most of my Hebrew has long since departed, but I did study Hebrew both at IU and at the University of London when I was living there as well. But one of the books that I used while I was teaching this course was one by Rabbi Morris Kurtzer, and it's been revised by Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman, and I have other works of his as well, called What is a Jew? And will it show up there? Yes, there, What is a Jew? This is one of my students' favorite books, and because I had 3 different books that we used in the course, and this is one of the ones that they always commented on they liked the best for the reading style as well as the structure of the book. The book is question and answer, which is very rabbinical. If you know anything about the rabbinical tradition, it's question and answer. So I will read to you a little bit about what's going on here. What are the High Holy Days? The High Holy Days are Rosh Hashanah, and you can actually put the emphasis, and it has the pronunciations in here. You can put the emphasis on different syllables. Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, and it can be Yom Kippur or Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, 10 days later. The 10-day period between is known as the 10 days of repentance, when we pass judgment before the heavenly throne. That's in quotations. During this period, tradition holds, God looks into our hearts to examine our deeds and our motives. So Rabbi Kurtzer is writing in a very personal way. He's not saying this happens to you. He's saying this happens to me. This happens to us, to the people who follow the Jewish tradition. But God is not alone in passing judgment. We Jews too sit in judgment upon ourselves, comparing our conduct during the past year with the better selves we had hoped to become when just 1 year ago we marked the last high holy days in promising to mend our ways and overcome our weaknesses. The resolve to do better with our life, literally to return to God and thus to repent, is called teshuvah or teshuvah. Teshuvah is a prime Jewish value, especially in the high holy day seasons. The concept carries with it a metaphor of space and of direction. Teshuvah implies returning in the sense of returning, turning again to God. Sin is, in that sense, like turning one's back on God and on God's ways. To begin anew is simply to turn around and find the warming glow of the divine simply awaiting our return. The most important symbol of Rosh Hashanah is the shofar, which is the image that I have behind me here. So I'm going to cover my camera up here for a moment so you can take a look at this. And this is a very special shofar. And again, the pronunciation can be shofar or shofar, depending upon, there was a comedian named Buddy Hackett who used to describe the differences in pronunciations based on where you lived in New York City. And so your mileage may vary in those ways. But the most important symbol of Rosh Hashanah is the shofar, or ram's horn, which is sounded during the worship of the new year. In ancient times, the shofar was an instrument of communication. In the hills of Judea, it was possible to reach the entire country in a matter of moments with shofar calls from a row of mountain peaks. In the Rosh Hashanah services, the shofar is the New Year's call to repent for our misdeeds of the past year, to return to God with contrite and humble spirit, and to distinguish between the trivial and the important in life, which is always a very good thing for us to do, so that the next 12 months may be richer in service to God and to humanity. So you're not just serving up, you're also serving across. So the Jewish tradition is a very strong tradition. The Christian tradition and the Muslim tradition take on board different elements of this, where you make a connection with the divine. So there's a connection between you and the divine, but also you're called to have a connection in the world, sort of horizontally. So we have vertical and horizontal in terms of who we interact with, what we interact with, how we're supposed to lead our lives. We're called to be social people. At the present time, we're called to be socially distant people. And that's one of the things that I think is important for us as we're entering this period. And this can be a period of reflection for those of us who adhere mostly to traditions outside of the normative Judaic tradition. I myself am a Christian minister, and I'm very, very sensitive to not co-opting traditions that don't belong in the tradition that I exist in, that I operate in. So people who take on Passover elements or Rosh Hashanah elements or other things and sort of graft them on as sort of something nice to do, often do so without context and without permission. So I'm trying to be sensitive to that as we're discussing these things. I invite you to also think about how important it is to honor the traditions while respecting the traditions, and respecting that those who do it for very important historical and spiritual reasons, and it's not just a nice thing to do. So pulling out a shofar in a Christian service, probably not appropriate. So, but the idea of reflecting on our relationship with God and reflecting on our relationship with the rest of humanity certainly is appropriate, and that's appropriate every day of the year. It's just this becomes a time when we reflect as a tradition that comes out of the Judaic tradition. We can sort of think along as they're doing and be inspired by them, so that we can also have that as part of our reflection while honoring the separateness of our tradition from them. It says, in spite of the solemn nature of the Rosh Hashanah message, an air of happy expectancy is also tangible in the home and synagogue, since the dominant emotion of the 10 days of repentance is born of our faith in God's compassion and forgiveness. As at all other hallmark occasions that demarcate Jewish sacred time, Rosh Hashanah, too, thus features this significant blessing. Thanks to God for having kept us in health, sustained us, and enabled us to reach this day. As a symbol of the sweetness that we hope will mark the new year, in the prayers that accompany the breaking of the bread, we dip the bread along with some sweet apples in honey. Traditionally, Jews do not wish each other a happy new year. The traditional greeting for the new year is Shana Tova. And again, you can vary some of the pronunciations there, but it basically means a good year. So among the variety of meanings that Jews assign to Rosh Hashanah is the birthday of the world, hence, as I showed you before, the changing of the year, the changing of the number from 5780 to 5781. The very anniversary of creation itself. And so once again, as we're going through our Genesis stories here, completely appropriate timing for discussing what's happening here with our Jewish neighbors. Among the day's prayers, one is looking for the day when all humanity shall come to serve you. That's in quotation marks. When, that is, every man, woman, and child of every race and nation will be joined in universal harmony with God. So that's a description from, again, Rabbi Kurtzer. If I can get the book to stay for a moment, yes, there. It actually has several different editions. The first edition of this book I got back in the early 1980s up in Chicago, and it had not been expanded and revised by Rabbi Hoffman here, but it had the same question and answer structure to it. And I remember I was going up to the Art Institute with a college college tour from one of the groups that I was in at IU at the time. And the bus was going to take us back home, say 9 o'clock at night, something later. The Art Institute closed at 6 or 7, so we had a few hours to walk around the streets. Well, I sort of walked up to the river, and there was this little bookstore, and I saw that book, the precursor of that book, on the shelf, and I thought, well, that sounds like an interesting kind of thing, the question and answer thing. I really liked. And so I bought that. I read almost all of it on the bus ride home, which was unusual for me because I suffer from motion sickness. And usually I can't read in car trips and bus trips. Trains are not as bad, planes are not as bad for that, but usually anything on wheels, like rubber wheels, like cars or buses or anything, it's like, no. So I always thought it was an interesting sort of divinely inspired, perhaps, incident that I was able to read that book on the way home. It was a 3.5-hour trip or something like that to get home, and I finished almost the entire book in that time period. So I can recommend that book as a useful book. My students would also recommend that book from the Modern and Contemporary Judaism course at the American Military University. You might even want to sign up for that course. I don't know if they're actually still teaching it, since I haven't been teaching there for a couple of years now, but I hope they're still teaching it, that's there. But one of the things I also wanted to do today, I'm going to clip in a couple of clips. I noticed I need to give you an apology because I noticed a couple of recordings ago, maybe it was last recording or the recording before, I said, and now here's a video, and then the video didn't show up. And that's because I will take videos out of YouTube and off the internet and splice them into our meeting here. And sometimes they're covered by copyright, and I'm not supposed to do that. I try to use things judiciously, and I leave whatever markers they have on the videos. It's clearly not my video when I'm doing that. And as a teacher, I use what's called the fair use doctrine. If I'm using a video to teach a class, if I'm using a video to do something that is certainly nonprofit, I feel I have a little bit more leeway in doing that, especially if I'm using shorter clips. And the clips that I use tend to be only about a couple of minutes long most of the time. So I'm going to clip in a couple of videos here again for us, and hopefully they will in fact show up for us. But that's what I'm doing, I promise. It is meant to be fair use. But what I want to do is I want to clip in for you a couple of fun things that I found. One is just a little over a minute long. There is a blowing of the shofar for Rosh Hashanah that was done in a congregation, Congregation Shalom, with the Rabbi Shoshana Perry, and the man who is blowing the shofar is Dennis McHugh. Which is, I've always been fascinated by that because McHugh does not sound like a Jewish name. But that's one of the interesting things. There are actually professional shofar blowers, professional shofar players. And it sort of reminded me how at my church, my old church here in Bloomington, we had people who came to the congregation who were essentially pinch hitters. And they would come in and they would sing, even though they weren't part of the congregation. And sometimes they'd come up for communion, and sometimes not. But they were there for the singing, and that was okay. That is also true in this tradition as well. So I'm going to clip that video in so that you can hear it. This can get a little bit loud sometimes. I'm hoping the video doesn't get too loud. But if you're wearing hearing aids, you might sort of be ready to turn it down for just a minute, and then bring it back up. So here I'm going to cover my screen again, and I will clip in the video here.
Trua Tkiya Gedola Yeshakah. That means may you have strength. That's like congratulations. Tkiya Trua Tkiya Gedola.
And once again, that is Rabbi Shoshana Perry and Dennis McHugh blowing the shofar for Rosh Hashanah. Another fun thing that I want to share with you is Shana Tova. Some of you may be familiar with the Muppets. Some of you may be familiar with different groups of television shows that have used Muppets in different ways. Well, I found this little clip of the Muppets singing a Shana Tova song, and I just thought it was absolutely hysterical the first time I saw it. So I'm going to clip that in again here. So again, I'm going to cover my camera, and I will clip that video in here.
Shana Tova. Shana Tova. Shana Tova. אני מאחל לכם שנה טובה ורגועה, שתזכו לעוד שנה, תזכו בלוטו 8 פעמים. שנה טובה. שנה טובה. שנה טובה. וים בבחורות 2 לפחות, ועם אחת מהם אלך לשתות. שנה טובה. שנה טובה. שנה טובה.
And now I'm back. Whenever I see that video, it sort of just makes it's silly. I mean, it's silly, but it's got the sort of the fun spirit of the holiday that's there. Going from the ridiculous to the sublime, we'll do it in the opposite way that the aphorism often says. I want to read to you a story from a service that I subscribe to on Facebook called The Accidental Talmudist. And Talmud is a series of commentaries and questions and answers, again, like the book from Rabbi Kurtzer, that expands on everything Torah and biblical. And if you've ever seen the movie Yentl, I highly recommend it with Barbara Streisand. But that movie is set in a school where people are studying Mishnah and Talmud. But there is a guy who operates newsletters and video services and other things called the Accidental Talmudist. He did not set up out in his life to become a holy man or any other kind of minister or teacher. His name is Sal Litvak, and he was a movie director. And he talks about his life as having a sort of a minor miracle that propelled him into Talmud study about 7 years ago. And now he and his wife every day put something up online and do other kinds of things to share their experience of Jewish wisdom and Jewish tradition. And one of the things that he posted a few years ago that I want to share with you, he's also shared it fairly recently as well, is something about the shofar in Auschwitz, which is one of the darker periods in Jewish history, worldwide forever. I mean, this is the Holocaust that we're talking about here. So I want to share a little bit of that story with you as well. Let me read this for you. I'm reading off of the screen here, so if my eyes seem to be wandering a little bit, that's why that's happening. It sort of reminds me of the old Johnny Carson monologue shows where you're watching him do a monologue to camera and you notice his eyes are sort of moving down below because he was going off cue cards. Well, I don't have cue cards, but I do have my cue internet here. And this is the story that our Accidental Talmudist posted. And he said, it's a shofar at Auschwitz. Chaskel Taidur was an inmate at Auschwitz who served as a work dispatcher during fall of 1944. As the Jewish high holy days approached, it was strictly forbidden to pray, and any Jews caught in communal prayer were shot dead on the spot. This is an important point. I'll deviate from what he's saying here, because typically you get together as a group. This is supposed to be a communal thing, and you have set rules for a minyan, how many people need to be there, how many men need to be there. These would have been mostly Orthodox Jewish people at the time. Chaskel helped, reading again, Chaskel helped religious prisoners by sending them to work details far away from the center of the camp, so there would be fewer guards watching and they could furtively join in prayer. On Rosh Hashanah, one of the prisoners returned to the barracks and said, "You won't believe it, Chaskel. Somebody has a shofar. Somebody blew a shofar on Rosh Hashanah." In a 2019 interview with the CBC, Chaskel's daughter, Judy Taidur Schwartz, a Holocaust scholar, explained how significant this was. People who heard the shofar blast said it gave them an incredible strength, incredible moral, spiritual not only in the religious sense, but in the sense that I'm a human being. After all, what the Nazis wanted to do with their prisoners is they wanted to wipe out their humanity. In Auschwitz, people had numbers tattooed on their arm. They were numbers. They were no longer human beings. Hearing a shofar reminded them that they were human beings. This was really dangerous. This is much more dangerous than trying to light a secret candle for Hanukkah or something like that. This is a noise. Chaskel himself didn't see the shofar until 3 months later, when Auschwitz prisoners were sent on a death march as the Soviet army closed in. Judy described what happened. As they were setting out for this march, when they were still in the camp, my father said that a prisoner came to him and put something into his hands. It was the shofar that was wrapped in rags. And this prisoner said, I'm not going to survive. I'm dying, and you're stronger than I am. Maybe you'll survive. This is the shofar. Take it. And if you make it out, tell the world that we had a shofar here in Auschwitz. For the rest of his life, Chaskel Taidur blew the Auschwitz shofar every year at Rosh Hashanah. The rest of the time, it was kept in a humble paper bag. When Chaskell passed away 28 years ago, Judy inherited the sacred horn in its paper bag, and it was treasured in the family as Grandpa's shofar. Last year in 2019, the Tidor family shofar was featured in an exhibition about Auschwitz at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York. It was also used at 2 New York synagogues in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I will share my screen here for just a moment once again so that you can see a picture. Here is the picture of Chaskell Tidor and the story from our accidental Talmudist over here on the side. And here you can see the shofar with the train tracks leading into Auschwitz in the background. The shofar continues to be blown, and that is what I have selected as the backdrop today for our Bible study. And now you know the story of that. I almost feel a little bit like Paul Harvey, and now you know the rest of the story about the shofar. But this is an incredibly important thing. This as an artifact, this as a practice of blowing the shofar, and the meaning that it has for the people is exactly why it shouldn't be co-opted by people just on a whim. It's like, oh, this is something nice to do. Because it is incredibly important and it is incredibly holy. And these are the people who are traced back all the way to Abraham, who is the study in our Bible that as we've been going through. The one that I picked up today off my shelf is the Tanakh, which the T in Tanakh stands for Torah, which is what we're going through. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's all the Torah that's here. And JPS is the Jewish Publication Society. One of the things you might notice, I'm holding the book like this, and you open it from, in our typical Western language style, the wrong side along there. And this is a relatively new translation. And you can see it's actually dual language. It has the Hebrew as well as the English on the different sides of the page that's there. But we were going through, we had just passed the story of Noah and the story of the Tower of Babel. And after the Tower of Babel, we have another listing of begats and begats and begats and begats. And this goes from one of Noah's sons. We have in chapter 11, this is the line of Shem. And we have Shem going from one person to another, to another, to another, until we get down to verse 24. Nahor had lived 29 years. Notice they're having children much before 200, 300 years like they were earlier in Genesis. And he begot Terah. After the birth of Terah, Nahor lived 119 years, so they were still living a bit longer than we're used to, and begot sons and daughters. When Terah had lived 70 years, he begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now this is the line of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran begot Lot. Haran died within the lifetime of his father Terah, in his native land, Ur of the Chaldeans. Abram and Nahor took to themselves wives, the name of Abram's wife being Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. So one of the things that we see here as we're getting into the post-Noah portion of the Bible is we're now getting very quickly into the Abraham story, which starts out as the Abram story. And we'll talk about why it goes from Abram to Abraham. And we'll talk about where it goes from Sarai to Sarah. And we'll talk about the importance of Ur of the Chaldeans. There are places that I have visited in Iraq that are Ur and cities of that time period, very, very ancient cities along the way. We have ziggurats and areas mapped out where there was irrigation and other kinds of settlements and developments. Again, there are debates back and forth about the timing of the cities and exactly which cities are which in some cases. Sometimes we're pretty clear on which ones they are. But one of the interesting things, of course, is we have some matchups between what's in the Bible and what in fact is found archaeologically. Sometimes, biblical archaeology being what it is, people have tried to shoehorn in a little bit too much what's in the Bible into what they find in the ground. And one of the things that I think is important to do, and people are doing it better today than they did, say, 100 and 150 years ago, is they're letting the discoveries speak for themselves and then taking the information from there rather than trying to place an interpretation onto it. I think that's a useful thing to remember when dealing with the Bible as well. We don't want to always shoehorn our interpretations into it. We want to let the Bible speak for itself and then try to see how it fits for us. But realize also that there are other peoples out there. There are some people who will hear the shofar and not understand the significance of it. There are some people who will break down in tears when they hear it. And there are some people, I will freely confess, I had to do this recording a couple of different times because when I was reading the story of Chaskel Tidor, I actually had to read it 3 different times for you because twice I started quivering in my voice a little bit too much. And I thought, it's okay for me to show emotion, but I need to also enunciate the words so that you can understand what I'm saying. So if you hear your Jewish neighbors blowing the shofar, wish them a Shana Tova, and ask them about their traditions, and praise the divine powers that are, the God who watches over all of us, that in fact what we still have from Auschwitz is the symbol of hope. And what we still have in humanity is the symbol of hope. And may the new year for all of us, whenever we calculate it, whether it's now or in January or in other parts of the world as other traditions have, it can be a new year each day for all of us. And now I'm preaching a little bit too much, so I'll save that for tomorrow. But again, I thank you for being part of our Bible study today. As I mentioned, I've done it a little bit differently today because of the day being what it is. We will pick up with Abraham, the story of Abraham there. I will read a little bit going on from the JPS, the Tanakh here, and talk a little bit more about what that is as well. And I will continue also, forgive me as I'm trying to arrange things so that I can pull things up, from Everett Fox, The 5 Books of Moses, which we've used as well, a bit from the Schocken Bible series. The Schocken publishers here are important publishers in the world of Judaica. Many of my Jewish studies books, and I actually have 2 complete bookcases of this kind of stuff coming from when I began my collection as a Jewish studies certificate student, and that's continued on. One of the highlights of my time at my seminary, named Christian Theological Seminary, was that we had a very strong Jewish-Christian dialogue program and a very strong emphasis on the awareness of the importance of the Jewish tradition as its own tradition, not as just simply a precursor of the Christian tradition or a precursor of Christianity and Islam, but as a thing of value and integrity unto itself, and as a people who have value and history and practices and identity unto themselves. And that was led in many ways by a man named Clark Williamson. And he's still with us, by the way. I don't mean to be referring to him in the past tense there, but there are several major books that have informed my sense of history and theology and what is sometimes called post-Shoah theology, which is Shoah is another word for the Holocaust in terms of describing what the Holocaust is. So post-Shoah theology is, how do we make sense of who and what God is for us as individuals in the world in light of such dramatic things? So I'll let that come into some of our discussions along the way as well. So don't be surprised at that. But I can see from the clock on the wall, as well as the cat who is saying it's the sun is going down now, so we're no longer Erev Rosh Hashanah. We're now getting really into it, and the cat wants food. The cat doesn't care what tradition it is. The cat knows the sundown, so it's food time. So I'm going to go do that. I want to remind my friends who are watching from Beltrace that I do want to come and visit you. So please, you're probably getting sick of my saying this every single video, but I will say it every single video. I want to come and visit you. Let me know if I can come and visit you. Again, the best way to do that is to let Melissa know and she can send me a message via Facebook. But I will do my best to get in touch with you. Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Afternoons are best for me, but I can make it work if it needs to be in morning for you. And every other Saturday. So please let me know. And otherwise, I hope to see you virtually tomorrow for our chapel service.